Welcome to the Shaping Portsmouth podcast. Shaping Portsmouth is a collaboration of key Portsmouth businesses, transforming Portsmouth together. Hello, and welcome to another Shaping Portsmouth podcast with me, CEO Dave Humphries. And today I am joined by Andrew Major, also known as Atlantic Rocketman. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Dave.
And in fact, do you prefer Andrew or Andy? Or
Yeah, Andrew's great. Yeah.
Andrew, we'll stick with that then. Or do we just call you Rocketman?
Yeah, Andrew's cool.
Now, so there's obviously a story behind how you've come to be known as Atlantic Rocketman, which we will get to in due course. But let's start off with a bit about you. So you're not from Portsmouth locally.
So originally, I was born in Abingdon, and I grew up in a small village called Cricklade, which is near the source of the Thames. I went to university in London, Middlesex University. And then in about 10 years ago, I became a Portsmouth resident. And I am really thrilled to have been living in Portsmouth, in Port Solent Marina, for the last 10 years.
So what attracted you to Portsmouth itself? What made you move here?
Well, I had a friend that had a boat at Port Solent Marina, and for years I've wanted to sail, and I've been attracted to the sea. And one day we looked at online at the estate agent and saw this fabulous property, and before I knew it, literally we only saw the house for 10 minutes, we bought it and we're living down here. But Portsmouth has got so much going for it, and yeah, I mean, I'm lost for examples. There's just so many of things that I love doing down here.
Yeah, definitely. And it will come as no surprise to people listening that there's clearly a connection between you and the sea, hence the name Atlantic Rocketman that we'll come on to.
Yeah.
But obviously, before that, you've had a career in business intelligence and marketing. So tell me a bit about that. How did you get into that, and what did that involve?
Yeah, when I was at university, they had an open essay paper, and we're always curious. It was on a Friday afternoon. We're always curious to know who the guest speaker was going to be. And one day, in walked this person, and they were a marketing researcher, and I was transfixed. I found it fascinating. And anyway, I got into that world and worked within business intelligence, and then worked my way up within pharmaceutical companies from a sales representative up through marketing, and ultimately became a marketing director and managing director of a Johnson & Johnson business. But then I gave all that up and then started my own business about 19 years ago. And I mean, the rest is history. It's just taken off.
How scary was that, sort of jumping into your own business, having been in sort of a secured employed role with a big corporate like J&J?
Well, I was with Johnson & Johnson for 23 years, and I felt like I needed a fresh challenge. And there's nothing more exciting than starting your own business from scratch and from first principles, and wondering how I got it. Have I got what it takes to make the cut? Have I got the selling skills? Have I got the marketing skills? And the best bit of advice I had was go out and get a couple. Forget the website, forget the setting up the businesses. Go out and get yourself a client. And it took me about 3 minutes. I had 3 contracts, so. It's been successful.
Yeah. And I suppose there's a theme to this in terms of, wanting to do something like that, a new challenge, because that's kind of where perhaps the story that we're going to talk about kind of starts, and wanting to do a new challenge. So before we talk about how you got into it, do you want to explain what you actually did?
Sure. So I took part in what is known as the world's toughest row. It's an annual rowing race organised by Atlantic Campaigns, and you start from this really lovely island, which is about an hour south of Tenerife, called La Gomera in the Canaries, and you row from there 3,000 nautical miles across to Antigua, actually Nelson's Dockyard, English Harbour, Antigua, which is phenomenally beautiful. The race itself had 36 teams, but they're largely made up of fours, threes, pairs, and there were 6 solos, of which 4 completed the race.
And so the point here is you were one of those solos, weren't you?
One of the crazy solos, yeah. It's funny, we almost get adopted by the other teams because they think we're so mad to be doing such a thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're the only ones. I think that. So I suppose the obvious first question has to be, what on earth inspired you to want to row across the Atlantic in the first place? I mean, there would be a presumption here that you were a really keen, active and competitive rower already, but that's not the case, is it?
Well, I had rowed on the rivers in Wallingford. Wallingford has the largest stretch of river without locks in Oxfordshire, so on the Thames. So, but river rowing is very, very different, and that was a lifetime away, if you like. No, I'll tell you that it's actually quite a personal thing, and I'll explain. And I get asked a lot, why did you want to do this? So I mentioned that I set up my own business, and we became the victims of our own success. I actually love what I do. It helps make a small part to patients' lives with conditions like HIV, depression, schizophrenia. And I get to travel all over the world and work with some great people. But there was one day I was reading the Times newspaper, and it was like a lightning bolt had hit me, because I realised that I was suffering from the signs of burnout. In fact, the article was called 50-something burnout, Are You on the Brink? And it explained the signs are quite insidious. I was becoming overwhelmed. I couldn't sleep at night. I was getting heightened anxiety. And I realised when I read that article, I needed to do something about it. I needed to take some responsibility. So I'm actually phenomenally lucky in that, I've got a lovely family, lovely wife. I love my job, as I've mentioned. But what I realised was that, and this might seem very selfish, but actually I didn't have anything for me. I'd spend my weekends, I don't know, B&Q or ironing or whatever. And I didn't really have anything just purely for me. So I just happened to be walking around the marina in Port Solent, and I came across this Atlantic rowing boat. It was called Pegasus. It's actually done 5 crossings of the Atlantic now. At that time, it was brand new, and it was about to embark on a journey with what was known as the Granddads of the Atlantic, 2 ex-paratroopers, who went on to become world record holders. They were in the world record books for being the oldest 2 to row across an ocean. This boat, I just was transfixed, and I was really curious. And the more I got into it, the more I found it was rejuvenating me. It was like the perfect tonic, because it wasn't only physical, it was technical. And it was like a light bulb moment. I've since realised that with a sense of purpose, it's like a switch with me. And scientifically, I've looked into it, and those people that have a heightened sense of purpose actually have much better mental health outcomes, much better longevity. And for me, certainly, I can get out of bed at 4 a.m. to do a 4-hour ergo session really easily when I've got a sense of purpose. Otherwise, I'm quite lazy.
Now, let's be clear here, for anyone listening who feels that they lack purpose or is struggling in any way with anxiety or mental health issues, you don't necessarily have to row across the Atlantic on your own. There are other options.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I got asked a question. I was at a big conference last week, and about 1,000 people, and I got asked a question at the end, and somebody said they thought it was quite an extreme way of getting over some burnout. And how I answered it was, when I was 12 years old, I was given a book by Chris Bonington, the climber, and I just found it brilliant. I read it from cover to cover. Then many years later, I met Rebecca Stevens, the first British woman to climb to the top of Everest. And I was just totally inspired. And I knew that I was never, ever going to be able to do that. And I was looking for what is going to be my thing. I've got friends that have built schools in Africa. There's all sorts of different purposes. And it just so happens this is the one that that literally floated my boat,
Yeah.
and got me interested. But actually, it's a very personal thing, and it depends on luck and circumstance as well.
And I mean, in sort of trying to work out the process that sort of kind of occurred inside your head at this point, but how quickly did you go from looking at Pegasus moored up in Port Solent to thinking, I'm going to row the Atlantic? What did that journey look like for you? Was it instantaneous? Did you think that's what I want to do? Or did it involve talking to a lot of people first before you made your mind up?
Well, I must have been quite impetuous because I saw the boat in Port Solent Marina on the Sunday, and I went down to my local bank on the Monday morning and threw down the €1,000 to sign up. And there is a but here. I hadn't really discussed it with my wife. Faux pas number one. I really messed up. I hadn't really discussed it with her. Actually, that became a bit of a problem down the line.
I can see that.
But yeah, it was pretty instantaneous, and actually a really big. So just to put it into context, I sold my car and I remortgaged my house to be able to do this. I ended up funding 98% of it myself because I failed, even my sales and marketing background, I failed to acquire the really big sponsors that would be needed to fund it. So a really big day in my calendar was the day that I put the deposit down on the ocean rowing boat itself. It's a £71,000 like Formula One racing car of the ocean rowing type. And that was a really big sign to everybody that I'm committed.
Yeah. People started taking you seriously at that point. It's not just a mad plan, but he's actually doing it.
Yeah.
So from that point, from the point where you've decided you're going to do it, you're committing, to buy your boat. What did that journey to because it's probably really easy to focus on just south of the Canary Islands to Antigua as the difficult part of the journey, but I would imagine all of the prep and all of the research, the training, the building of the boat, that must have been quite involved.
Yeah, well, they say 98% of the effort is getting to the start line. It's like an iceberg, you see the top of it. They also say that it takes about 1,000 days to do something well, whether it's learn German, play the trombone, whatever. And it was the same in my instance.
Okay.
It took me 3.5 years to prepare, but it really was intense. Once I'd got the rowing boat ordered, I went deep on my knowledge. So I bought every single book I could possibly get my hands on, asked a million curious questions. And it was all about getting that fluency in the subject matter that would give me credibility when I then sat down with important people in that world.
Yeah.
I then went on a course. They say you have to train for the task. So I went on a week's course, and learned about essential navigation, first aid, use of the radio. But then they took us to this really cool place. It's called the Underwater Studio. It's in Basildon, and it's where James Bond's filmed, the Titanic. And it's essentially a 15-meter deep pool. And they threw in a life raft. They threw us in. And we just spent all day getting in and out of the life raft. And what that gave us was some muscle memory, if you like. It didn't get rid of uncertainty when I came to the race itself, but it certainly gave me the capacity to deal with problems. And at that point, I then went out to the race start 2 years before my own race, and I networked like mad. Networking's not a thing that came to me naturally. I've had to work at it over the years. But whilst I was there, I had coffees, beers, pizzas with as many of the people as possible. And funnily enough, people from that original course and from my time in La Gomera then down the line became key members of my team. It gave me access to knowledge and expertise that accelerated my learning. So that was the first point. We'll talk about the cause in a moment. So I then focused on the cause. But then at that point, I had to really go deep in the spreadsheets, understand where all the budgets should go. Every nut and bolt had to be accounted for. I did have a corporate sponsor, not for me, but they made a donation to the Elton John AIDS Foundation. So I set about visiting all of their sites. and encouraging their employees to row a mile of my journey on ergos. And this became important in the race itself because I had their names on my cabin wall. And when the going got tough, I'd look at those names and think, gosh, Andrew, they rowed a mile of your journey. Get out there, make it happen. I had to get fit. I'm a marathon runner by background, so I teamed up with a boxing coach, showed him a video and said, can you get me from here to here in 3 years? And it started to work on my core fitness. And also, I mean, there's many, many components, as you can see here. Mental resilience is a really big deal. So I started getting up at 4 a.m, unusual times of the day, putting in a shift on the ergo. And soon, after you've done this for a while, you just take it for granted. So when you're then out in the middle of the Atlantic, when you have got to do that shift in the middle of the night and it's pouring down with rain, you just get on with it.
Yeah.
There's a lot involved, and there's a lot of theory, but also once you take on the best rowing coaches that will help you. I work with 2 world record holders. One he's the only person to row around Great Britain, Andy Hodgson. And then Duncan Roy, who is a fantastic rowing coach and has got lots of world records. He's in Guinness Book of Records for the race itself. So who better to train me around Great Britain and then in the race itself? And things like the complexity in the equipment. So you have to familiarise yourself with all the equipment. The water makers are a very expensive bit of kit, but it goes wrong really easily. The electrics, you need to know how to take the electrics apart and deal with all of that. So at this point, you've then got to galvanise all your skills. You've got to get out there and start to do the training actually on the water itself. And I had a bit of a eureka moment. I left Gosport. I decided to do my first solo row. Not only, I also did it at night, which was a bit of a challenge. And the Queen Mary 2 went by in the early hours of the morning as I was rowing across to Osborne Bay on the Isle of Wight. And I just thought, I can do this. So at this point, some of my friends who belong to the LGBTQ community said, Andrew, it's a really big deal that you're doing this. You need to get the message out there. So I then worked with a friend who has a media company, and we produced a press pack. And that press pack helped us get in the Mail on Sunday and start to get our campaign out there. And the campaign's important.
So this is kind of where your story becomes interesting in a different dimension. But before we sort of plunge into that, obviously you're rowing across the Atlantic solo, so you're on your own. But you've mentioned a couple of times the people around you, the people that you brought into your team. I'm getting a sense that this was not something you did on your own, but actually the support network, as well as just those coaches around you, was probably quite expansive.
Yeah, I mean, there's no such thing as solo in ocean rowing, really, in that you have to have the best team about you. It's also like that in business, isn't it? In that you wrap around you the best people. And so I had a satellite phone when I was out in the Atlantic. I got to speak to my loved ones. It's funny, actually. I spoke to the person that won the solo race after the race itself. I went to his talk, and he was asked a question about, how did he cope with his mental resilience during the row and keeping in touch with people. And this was an anathema to him. He basically then said, Andrew's in the audience. Andrew, how did you cope? I said, I love my music. I spoke to my wife several times a day. And he went, and his wife was sat in front of me. He said, I didn't speak to my wife once. And I then said, well, that makes the difference between the person that won and the person who didn't. And of course, the crowd thought it was hilarious. But, I did get a lot of resilience from speaking to my team. I get weather instructions every day from my team and had an update with them at certain intervals.
Yeah. And I suppose as we talk about the race itself, that will become probably more key. But when you did mention rowing on the river at Wallingford, I remember Wallingford being a very lovely, peaceful little town. I can't imagine it's quite like the middle of the Atlantic there.
No, well, funnily enough, even the Solent, I really enjoyed going over to Seaview and to Osborne Bay, but it was flat as anything, even on a rough day. On my first day leaving La Gomera, the waves were about 10 foot high. This is Office Andy. I threw up on myself on the first day, which wasn't a good look. I only had 4 tops, and one of them was down on day one.
Yeah.
And I put the seat back and I looked round, and it was literally just sea, sky, and me. And I phoned my wife to tell her, almost like, oh, guess what? It's just, that. And she said, well, what did you expect? But went into the race, and we'll talk about this in a little while. And it sounds dramatic, but actually the scale of nature out there is huge. From the bottom, on the worst day, the bottom of the trough to the top of the wave was about 80 feet, which is a sort of a townhouse, if you like. So it was quite daunting, really.
I can imagine. So the cause itself then, because the next part of this story is not just deciding to go out and row the Atlantic on your own, but you're now doing it to raise some money. So how you've mentioned the Elton John AIDS Foundation already. So how did that come to be the cause that you decided to row for?
That's a great question. So look, my wife and I, we do a lot for charity, and we support a lot of the cancer charities, the Teenage Cancer Trust, Macmillan, and I'm currently working with Thames Hospice. When I looked at all of the charities, well, first of all, the World's Toughest Row is traditionally been an absolute fantastic platform for people to do some good in the world, and also is a fantastic media showcase. It has fantastic TV, radio, and social media reach. So you know that your message is going to get out there, and if you want to make impact, you can. When I looked at all of the charities, most of them were the more traditional ones, like the ones I've mentioned already. Now, over the years, I've been passionate about diversity. In my business life, I was a co-lead on the Women's Leadership Initiative, which was about women being able to equally go for roles in boardroom and executive roles within companies. And I've been passionate about that. In this instance, when I looked at all of the charities, I didn't see diversity in there. And I really am a strong believer in fate. And I was traveling back from London, and I picked up the London Evening Standard, as you do, and I just flicked it open. And I was absolutely transfixed at a line that jumped out the page at me. And it said, we believe more than anything that you deserve the right to choose who you love and to love yourself for who you are, no matter where you are in the world. Wow. Yeah. Now that is something worth, that was inspiring for me. And I later found out that it was Mr. David Furnish and Sir Elton John that had made that speech at the LGBTQ Awards in London. That was it. Yeah. I knew in an instant that I needed to support the community. And Atlantic Rocketman was born. And the thing is that I really love marketing and branding and campaigns. And here it's really important because you've got 3 years before you're about to do the race. You need to galvanize a lot of things, sponsors, charities, etc. So, and you want to differentiate. So I came up with this approach. There was just one thing that was interesting. A friend sat me down in a coffee shop and looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Does Elton know?" Well, funnily enough, I don't think Elton still knows whether or not I did the thing. But I kind of witheringly said, well, no. And he then looked me in the eye and he said, well, you don't want to upset Elton, do you? So what was great about this friend is he had a contact in the Elton John AIDS Foundation. And before we knew it, we'd written off to them. But this is a learning for me. Persistence pays, because it actually was our 4th attempt before we got through.
Right.
And ultimately, we ended up with a Teams call with them. They're based in New York. And by the end of this, they were enthralled. They said we'd be honoured. And actually, they said we'd look forward to lighting candles along the way for you, which I thought was a very Elton thing to say. But I was absolutely thrilled. I got one of the biggest charities of the world on board. And at this point, I thought I was going to have loads of companies queuing to support, but the reality was that it was far from the case.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I guess that then led to a natural relationship with the local Pride Trust, did it?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of other steps that lead up to that. So the first is that I realised that allyship is actually a really big deal, that you can move mountains from allyship. And I worked with the Elton John AIDS Foundation on their messaging. So it was all about LGBTQ plus stigma. And the reason why this is important, because actually AIDS, preparations exist to stop new cases of AIDS. It could be stopped today if we wanted.
Yeah.
But I was amazed to find out that in a third of the countries of the world, if you're gay, you'll be incarcerated. They'll put you in prison. And in 13 countries, if you're homosexual, they'll kill you.
Yeah.
So I found that, I just think that's crazy.
Yeah.
And so what that does is it means people that really need that healthcare don't go and find it. So that became our calling cry. We really wanted to make sure that was our messaging and what we focused on. It was less about raising money, more about the awareness. And so at that point, I wanted to make a big noise, but I wasn't sure what that would look like. The boat itself is a brilliant platform for doing something, but I didn't know. And at that point, I met a neighbour's son, Amar Singh, his name is, and he is an art patron. But what's really interesting about Amar is he helped legalise homosexuality in India. And as a result, a famous Australian painter had painted a portrait of Amar that had just been acquired by the National Portrait Gallery. Well, the importance of this is, in an instant, I knew because he showed me what the painting looked like. In an instant, I knew, because around Amar's wrist was the Pride ribbon, and it was paying homage to his ambassadorialship in that role. But basically, I knew, and wherever I looked on London buses, wherever, I could see the Pride ribbon. So we thought, you know what, we're going to wrap that around the boat. Now, I then, to answer your question, was reaching out to the Portsmouth Pride organisation, and I got in contact with Tally and CP Robinson, and CP was absolutely fantastic. Now, that bear in mind, this was quite late on that I managed to get in touch with them, and CP said, look, I really would like to come and see your boat. And literally, I had one evening before it shipped. He came to Gosport, we did a photo shoot in the rain, and then by Monday morning, they had a press release that went out. Now, I was then educated that actually Portsmouth as a city had won the bid to host UK Pride. And it was just fantastic link with the story and also they had just had their stakeholder event. It was just a fantastic link to then the Pride event in June. Also the flag, the logo that they had, we had a massive one made and shipped out to the finish line, and the goal was to then show that there. I had fantastic support. And on World AIDS Day, which was literally whilst I was in La Gomera waiting to start the race, I was going to join the stakeholder event.
Indeed, yeah.
But sadly, the Wi-Fi went down in Portsmouth and I couldn't join. So whilst the Wi-Fi went down, Wi-Fi had to step up and stand up in front of everybody, including our local MPs, and present and did a fantastic job.
And including myself.
Including yourself.
Did a very good job. And so that was where I first kind of came to connect with you and what you were doing. I met your wife at that event and learnt about what you were doing there from her, and she gave me one of the cards. And then I started following you on Instagram through the journey from that point and looking at what was going on. And I must admit, I had expected to get, here we are starting and hooray, I've finished, and not a lot in between.
Yeah.
But actually there was frequent updates and some really interesting and some very beautiful footage at times of things like pods of dolphins and stuff. So that probably takes us to the start line and this daunting challenge that you're going to take on. At that point in time, whilst we were all, happily sipping cocktails in the Queen's Hotel and listening to the amazing presentation that your wife did, how were you feeling at that point when you were, it was very real?
Yeah, well, that was the Sunday evening, and actually I was okay at that point. But on the Monday morning, the Parc de Fermé, which is a huge area like in Formula One motor racing, where all
Yeah.
the cars are lined up and they're inspected and prepared. That's the same with ocean rowing. We've all got the boats lined up, and the Parc de Fermé opened at 8 o'clock on the Monday morning. And I have to say, I felt quite overwhelmed. I sat in my cabin, had a chocolate biscuit, and thought, gosh, where am I going to start? And so I just started cleaning the boat. I realised, even though I was very well organised, I still had a lot to do. But actually, it's quite a busy time there in La Gomera. My support team came out. We had an inspection. This is quite a nerve-wracking. It's a 2-hour process, and it was a former solo ocean rower that was involved in that. And at the end, he asked me a question. He said, "How do you think it went?" And I kind of said, "Well, I've learned a lot from you." I was giving him a diplomatic answer, and he said, "It's by far the best prepared I've ever seen, including my own." And I just felt that was a fantastic tick for us. We laid out all our food for 85 days. I was 500 calories off, so they made me buy a bar of chocolate. We got the boat in the water, and we tested all our systems. And at that point, the bombshell was dropped. You go in a day early.
Yeah.
And basically, it was a huge cyclone coming, and we were told no social media, no eating. You've just got to go south hard. And before I knew it, it was ready to go. I'm walking out to the boat, and the quayside's rammed. The race director looks you in the eye. I mean, this is quite a big deal. The previous year, not one but two people had died in the race. So, or one person in the race, one independently. So they were chasing their dreams, but you have to take it seriously. As I'm leaving the harbour in La Gomera, there's a huge sign that says 3,000 miles to go, as if you don't need to be told. But then it's weird because it then goes, well, it's just you and sea and sky, and it's quite a contrast to the craziness of La Gomera.
So you mentioned that sort of first day and the choppy waves and being sick, but what did a day look like? I'm guessing you had very different weather throughout. Some moments it would have been absolutely horrendous. Other days it would have been absolutely incredibly beautiful. But I would imagine that the physical nature of the challenge meant that there was a bit of a routine that you worked through that perhaps didn't vary depending on the weather too much. Of what a day looked like for you from waking up, and in fact, how well did you even sleep? I mean, what was it like?
Oh, so there's a couple of things there. So let me pick them off one by one. The first is that the race itself is quite strategic. So you can divide the crossing into thirds.
Yeah.
The first third is big headwinds, big seas, and your body is mentally, physically adjusting to sleep patterns, to the food, etc. The middle third is fast, you're surfing down the waves, and it's very wet. And then the last third is hot, it's slow, there are currents, and also Serengeti grass sometimes on the surface of the sea.
Right.
Your navigational accuracy has to get sharper because you don't want to miss the island at the other end. So the conditions do change. I had some days where it was absolutely lovely. I was doing 13 or 14 knots surfing down the waves, which was fantastic. I have other days where it was completely calm, or crazy weather. So that's that. Let's talk about my routine. So I had a shift pattern organised in my mind with my crew, my shore team. But I actually ended up adapting it. So you spend about 18 hours of your day rowing, and you do it in sort of 3-hour blocks, and then you have a little rest. The ideal thing would have been to have a block of the sweet spot is 90 minutes of sleep. That's the most ideal.
Yeah.
But what I was doing is I was napping for about 30 minutes, perhaps twice during the day. And then I'd have a block of sleep at night of about 3 or 4 hours, depending. So I had to adapt a little bit. In advance of going, I had a visit from Liz Wardley, who had been in the race the previous year. The really good thing is you talk to all these other ocean rowers. And Liz is an Aussie, and she said, "Hey Andy, can I have a butcher's round your boat?" And I said, "Sure, hop aboard." And she said, "Andy, your mattress is rubbish." So I realised the mattress wasn't great. So I got in contact with this fantastic company up in Scotland called Durafoam. They produce pressure ulcer mattresses for the NHS. Who better to produce stuff for my mattress? And they gave me this mattress for free. But what was brilliant is it worked, but they coated it in body bag material, which wasn't great. But anyway, this was so what you do is you innovate, and that gave me a perfect. You don't want to be spending in your 90 minutes. A couple of hours. You don't want to be spending most of that time trying to get to sleep. You want to be into deep sleep as quickly as possible, and that really helped me. But when I got back from the row, I actually found out that I had a condition called Hashimoto disease, which is an autoimmune disease, and a side effect of that, because of the lack of regulation in my thyroid, was that I was phenomenally tired. So it was a big impediment to me in the race. I was incredibly tired all the time. When I got back, I realised it's because I had this underlying condition.
Yeah. But so that's interesting, because it makes me wonder, when you're sleeping, so there's two things in there that you've mentioned. One is the importance of navigation.
Yeah.
You don't want to miss the island.
Yeah.
And the other's obviously sleeping for 3 hours.
Yeah.
What happens to your navigation whilst you're asleep? Did you go to bed wondering where you'd be when you woke up? Was it, did you wake up and think, all right, first thing to do, where the hell am I?
Yeah, well, the first thing, Dave, is if the weather's intense, then you don't go to bed. You have to row through it. However, what one does crossing the Atlantic is you go south to a certain longitude and latitude, and you hit the trade winds, and they then theoretically then push you across.
Yep.
So even when I'm not rowing, I'm roughly going in the right direction.
So that would be your second third, where you hit the trade winds and you're essentially surfing down the waves.
Yeah, indeed. In the back cabin is an auto tiller. It's like a saw that goes up and down, and basically it links to my navigational equipment. I've got a chart plotter, which is a bit like a GPS in a car, and you set a bearing and it will automatically keep you on track. It will automatically adjust the rudder. But what I found was that in an average night, say, I would get knocked off course about 8 or 9 times. And you could tell that because the waves would then smack into the side of the boat.
Yeah.
So at that point, I have to get up. I've got to be wearing all my safety equipment, harnessed on. I then have to pull the boat around, which is a phenomenally physical thing to do. In the end, I worked out a really nifty way of doing it with that, which I could do in about 3 minutes. But at the start of the race, it was taking me a while, and it's not something I could have practiced in advance. But that's how night was fascinating because the stars were unbelievable.
Yeah,
right? I spent most of my time with my mouth open, but when there was cloud cover and you didn't have that moonlight dancing over the top of the waves showing you the direction they were coming from, it was very difficult to have some sort of contextual judgments to know where they were coming from. But I bought this really nifty little hand light. It boasted that its beam could go up to a mile. I think it was probably more like half a mile. But what was great is I could shine that on the surface very quickly and work out which way the waves were coming and then adapt accordingly.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, you talk about the need to sort of go out and manually readjust your course. But there are other tasks that you had to manually do. And what jumped out at me as quite surprising when I saw your presentation at our Pride stakeholder event was you actually had to get in the water.
Yeah. Do you know what? In advance, I was really excited about this. I really liked the idea of like jumping in the water. but the reality was far different. Let me
Yeah.
explain why one needs to do this. The boat essentially becomes a micro-environment. So when you leave, small fish come with you on the journey. They like the shelter and the environment under the boat. The only problem is as you progress across the ocean, barnacles stick to the underside of the boat, and these barnacles act like friction in the water. Now, these boats are only going sort of 2 to 3 knots, and if you're losing half a knot from friction from these things, then it becomes a big deal. So once a week, I'd be told by my team, right, Andrew, it's now time you've got to jump in the water and scrape the barnacles off the boat. So there's a very strict safety procedure. You notify the safety officers, you're tethered, you've got safety lines, and you just jump in and you get on with the task, and you hold on for grim death and like dive underneath the boat with your goggles and scrape like hell. This is quite a physical job, but also it's in the Atlantic. The salt crystals are huge, so just the salt on one's skin is very abrasive. At any point in time, you look down, it's 2 miles on average of water underneath you. So it's quite a long, it's quite a deep swim. And there's phenomenal dangers around the back end of the boat because the boat is going up and down in the swell about 6 or 7 feet. So it'd be very easy to get bashed on the head. So you've got to be phenomenally careful. These pesky barnacles are really tough to get off as well. So anyway, but that was a bit of a job and a half.
I can imagine, and I can see what you mean. At first, the notion of jumping in and doing a bit of barnacle scraping seems like quite a nice thing to do. But when you then put it in the context of all those dangers, and I suppose including 2 miles down and not knowing what's in the water with you at that point, I don't know.
You put a camera down, have a little look, but have
a little what's down there, and it must be very concerning. So obviously you're motoring through the race. What were the other great dangers that you faced? What were the things that really worried you?
Yeah, well, I'm going to joke and then I'm going to go a bit more serious. So the jokes were the worst thing that happened to me is I got logged out of Spotify, and I love my tunes. So the thought of having no podcasts or tunes for 3 weeks was filling me with dread. But no, the reality is that so on the boat we have a thing called an AIS, an automatic identification system. All boats have them. And essentially what it does is it tells you if you're on a head-on course with another boat. And my alarm went off 21 times in total out there. It's quite busy out in the Atlantic.
Yeah. So it turns out you thought you'd be on your own.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah, these range from little tiny fishing boats to, 400-meter long cargo ships. And I had some that were friendly and some that were not so friendly. I'll describe both. So a friendly example was the Bondi Globe USA team. They called me up on the radio and they said, "Hey, Rocketman," they said, "we've been following you on Instagram. Can we swing by and take some video?" I said, "Sure. Well, why? I'll take some video of you. You take some video of me, and we'll do a mashup." And it was fantastic. That was quite early on to see people waving. And stuff. It was quite great. In the middle of the race, I had one that wasn't so great. It was actually middle of the day. It was boiling hot and sunny, and actually I was really loving my power ballads, and I was singing away. And then I thought, in the heat haze, can I hear something? And literally, because your mind's playing tricks with you, literally I opened the cabin door to find the alarm going, rah, 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 it's going crazy. So I jumped in the cabin, I grabbed a flare with one hand, the radio with the other, looked on the screen, and it said, distance to impact 1.5 miles. Now, this boat was doing 8 knots, so it's going to be on me in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So I'm on the radio. It was a boat called the Margarita. Margarita is jazzy, jazzy, jazzy over. And finally, the captain came on and he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, have you seen me?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Look, I'm 1.5 miles in front of you. Even if I row like crazy, I can't get out of your way. You're going to hit me, or there's a high likelihood you will." Now, this boat was a dangerous goods, 400-meter long cargo ship. It did not want to change its course. So in the end, I had to say to the captain, "Look, you're now in my ship's log. if you hit me, you'll be prosecuted for manslaughter. And not only that, you're in breach of maritime law because you have to yield. Power has to yield to non-power. The boat ended up going within 250 feet of me. It was the size of a 4-story house. So one minute I'm, I don't know, listening to my power ballads, and the next minute I've got this massive great threat coming down on me. So that was a bit of a weird day.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I can imagine.
Yeah.
So obviously you're in a race, and you've mentioned the navigation equipment and stuff that you've got, but throughout the whole race, how aware were you of the positions of your competitors, and in fact, how did that play out in terms of where you've then finished?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on the boat, we have a thing called a yellow brick tracker. It gives you a GPS bearing, and it says to the world how you're progressing. You can see how many miles you've rode, and family and friends, they come what are called dot watchers, and they can follow this, and it gets highly addictive. I have to say, family and friends were saying I was up all night following you on, So some teams, what they do is they have family or friends or even a shore team that would send them updates. So these updates are every 4 hours, so they'll send them an update on where their competitors are. I didn't have this to begin with, but as the race progressed, I felt I really needed it. And I started to get a better sense of where some of the other boats were. And then towards the end of the race, there's actually 3 safety boats. You don't really ever see them. I saw one of them, and it was a big weather day. It came tanking by me really fast, and as they went by, I shouted, "Where are you going now?" And they said, "We're going on to the next boat ahead of you. It's a pair called Glimmering Sea." So this was a husband and wife team from New Zealand. And so I thought, thank you very much. That's competitive intelligence. I now know that I've got my nearest rivals.
Yeah.
So there were solos by their very nature going to be towards the back of the pack. And Mark was first with Ocean Ways, then Ananya, then Guile, and I was the last of the solos. I was 4th. But I didn't want to, I know this sounds awful, Dave, but I didn't want to become last of the whole race. Yeah. So I had 2 teams that I was vying with, Glimmering Sea and Yala Go. Glimmering Sea, I caught up. I managed to catch up those 7 miles. And then my lovely wife went out for a big night out and got back in the early hours of the morning, checked my GPS position, and then sent me a message, said, "You've caught them up. Get out and row." So I spent 4 hours then in the middle of the night rowing like mad. And when Glimmering Sea woke up at 8 o'clock in the morning, I was 3 miles ahead of them. Yala Go, who were a mother and son team from Switzerland, were coming up fast, and I knew that they would be fast. Yeah. So anyway, I extended that lead from 3 miles to 14 miles within a day, and within 3 days, I was up to 67 miles ahead of both of them, and they couldn't catch me. Yeah. Yala Go came in next, and then finally Glimmering Sea came in last. But they got just desserts because they were a husband and wife team. They came in on Valentine's Day, and they ended up in the Guinness Book of Records for being the oldest married couple to row across an ocean.
Lovely, yeah. So that coming in moment, how did it feel? How would you sum up, what it was like coming across that line? And I'm guessing there were crowds and there was a welcome. And
yeah, well, there's a precursor to that, which is the last 24 hours, which was a bit crazy. And actually, it was the worst day of the whole lot. In the middle of the night, there was a really bad storm, one of these sort of Caribbean storms. And I've got an electronic locator beacon outside of the cabin door, and it's meant to go off under 2 meters of water. But because of this storm was so intense, it went off. So at 3 in the morning, I'm getting calls on the satellite phone saying we've got a search and rescue, on for you. Do you need it? And I said, no, it's gone off by mistake. So I had to reset the equipment. I then got so worked up I needed to go to the toilet. But then I then realised, as I was out on deck with this crazy storm going on, there was this bird flying. And it was keeping horizontal with me, and it was looking me straight in the eye. It was the most weird moment I've probably had in all my life. I was saying, "Are you looking at me? Am I looking at you?" Anyway, I don't know whether I was hallucinating or what, but anyway, this strange moment. I woke up then, tired, and before me was Antigua, and they call it threading the eye of the needle. At that point, your weather router hands over to the organisers, and in their wisdom, they were bringing me in sideways. The problem was, the weather was really bad, and I was getting smashed around. I actually smashed my head twice against the cabin, and I thought, do you know what? I'm going to ignore their advice, and I basically set a waypoint, went go, and just went for it.
Yeah.
And I ended up really close to the rocks. I was about 200 feet or so from the rocks, and it was hard, but I managed to get to English Harbour and eventually cross the line. But it was a really intense day. I started at 5 a.m. I got in at like 6 at night. So to answer your main thrust of the question, is what was it like at that point? Well, I've just crossed the line. I look up and I can see my wife like a blob on the. There's a fort looking down on the harbour mouth, and I could see her. And that was I feel almost emotional talking about it, because that was a moment of realisation that actually I'd achieved it. You set off these flares, and I'd bought these special gloves because I knew the flares would be really hot. And I just, in my bravado, thought, I don't need the gloves. God, it was like holding fire. These things are like wicked. Anyway, you do your flares moment, and the media boat's going around you. Now, at this point, I've been at sea for 2 months where I've not really heard, I've only heard the wind. I've not really heard too many voices. And there are people swimming out to you. There are boats coming out to you. A couple of days before I reached English Harbour, a big sailing boat went by me. It's a 200-foot-long, lovely mahogany boat. And they shouted, "We'll have the rum on ice in Antigua." And as I came in and I embraced my wife, I jumped off the boat. I couldn't walk, by the way, so I was hobbling. Embraced my wife and my mum. And behind them was this crew of the Wisp, this lovely boat, looking at me, and they said, "Here's the rum on ice." It was just the most fantastic moment. But you've got the big boats with the horns going. You've got restaurants playing, "We Are the Champions." I mean, it was just a cacophony of noise. I actually found it too much.
Yeah.
I was almost in meltdown.
I can imagine. An incredible achievement. And you should be very, very proud of yourself for doing it. And obviously a lot of money raised for the Elton John AIDS Foundation as well. But I suppose before we finish, the last question I want to ask is what's next?
Oh, that's
how do you follow it, or don't you?
Well, that night when I sat in my accommodation after the row, I was a shattered person. I'd gone from being a racing snake to being an old bloke, to be honest with you. And it then took almost a year to recover. I'm in my 60s, and although I trained really hard, for the physicality of it, it did take its toll. I also, when I got back, I needed to get back into work and earn some money. It's a phenomenally resource draining experience. That being said, I'd almost lost my mojo. I felt a bit lost. I felt like I needed something else. And so, I've actually last week signed up to run the Marathon des Sables in April. So the world's toughest road to the world's toughest running race. 6 marathons in 7 days in the Moroccan Sahara Desert in 45-degree heat. Oh gosh! So I'm gonna have to get my head around training for that task. But that will be next, and then, to be honest, I'd love to do more rowing. I've still got the boat. The Atlantic's one thing, but doing the Holy Trinity of the Pacific and the Indian, I'd love to do that. I don't know whether I'll be able to do that because it's just so expensive. What I'd love to do is to do the mid-Pacific from San Francisco to Hawaii. It's a tough one because the winds blow inshore. Solos don't normally do it. But the shipping costs are the biggest challenge. So if there's anybody out there that runs a shipping company or knows anybody who wants to help in shipping, let me know, because that's the biggest impediment to doing the next challenge.
Well, hopefully you'll find a way, and certainly good luck with the marathons. You don't do things by halves, clearly. But So we've well at the end of our time, but before we end our podcast, we always like to finish by asking our guests the same question, which is there somewhere in Portsmouth that you really like, that you would recommend to other people, something to do, somewhere to go? What would be yours?
Ooh, my wife and I, we ponder this often, and there's so many. Do you know what? Portsmouth is fantastic. I love the Great South Run. Sail GP is about to take place there. The rich history, Gunwharf with its shopping. I love the restaurants around Port Solent Marina like Prachi, Kotai, and also Solomeo. They're all fantastic. But the one thing, if I'm being pressed, the one thing that we absolutely love as a family and is going to Victorious. Victorious Music Festivals. I've been to Glastonbury Festival 19 times. I love live music, but Victorious is absolutely fantastic. And to have headliners like Richard Ashcroft, unbelievable. So, Victorious would be my tick. It's a great weekend.
I have to say, us in the Shaping team, it's one of our favourite weekends of the year, partnering with Victorious and Portsmouth Pride Trust on the City Alliance, and the weekend that we have there every year with them. It's great. So I'm definitely with you on that. I love Victorious. And do you know what? I think you are the first of all of our guests to ever raise Victorious, actually. So, no, brilliant. Love that. It's been great chatting to you. I could talk for another hour. It's such an inspiring story, such a great thing that you've done. I loved sharing your journey with you on social media as it happened, and seeing little posts like Christmas Day and things like that on there. It was absolutely fantastic. So, and it's been so great to meet you in person. So thank you for coming in and doing this with us. And hopefully we'll see a lot more of you, but we'll look forward to following your further challenges. So thank you.
Dave, I'm honoured to be here in Portsmouth and living in Portsmouth.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. This podcast was brought to you by Shaping Portsmouth, working to make Portsmouth the #1 UK city in which to invest, live, learn, work and visit. To find out more, please visit shapingportsmouth.co.uk. This podcast was supported by Spark Community Space and Portsmouth Community Lottery.
And at this point, I thought I was going to have loads of companies queuing up, bless you, to